Finally,
burn them all!
the day of reckoning came. Robert Baratheon marched to the council after his victory at the Trident. But my father arrived first. The whole Lannister army at his back, promising to defend the city against the rebels. I knew my father better than that. It's never been one to pick the losing side.
Most people hear that line and think it's about the sack of King's Landing, about Tywin showing up late, switching sides, and getting lucky. But what if I told you that this one line from Jaime actually reveals the blueprint of a plan that was decades in the making? A plan so ruthless, so perfectly calculated, that by the time Tywin Lannister finally moved his army, the Targaryen dynasty was already dead. It just didn't know it yet, because the fall of House Targaryen was not a sudden event. It wasn't caused by a kidnapped girl, or a hot-headed prince, or even a rebellion. It was the result of a slow, quiet, and absolutely lethal game of marriages, alliances, and betrayals that was being played long before Robert Baratheon ever raised his warhammer. And Tywin Lannister was not a bystander in this game. He was trying to be its architect. So today, I'm going to show you exactly how Tywin planned to win the Game of Thrones before there even was one, and how the Mad King's one desperate move to stop him accidentally set the entire continent on fire. But first, we need some context.
Did you have to bury her in a place like this? She should be on a hill somewhere with the sun and the clouds above her.
She was my sister. This is where she belongs.
She belonged with me.
Most people hear that line and think it's just a touching moment between two old friends, but there's something much bigger hiding behind it. Because the bond between Robert and Ned wasn't an accident. It was engineered. Years before the rebellion, the great houses of Westeros were doing something unprecedented. They were building a super alliance through a web of strategic marriages and fosterings, and the scale of it was terrifying. For centuries, great lords married within their own regions. A Stark married a Flint, a Tully married a Went, an Arryn married a Royce. This kept power regional, contained, and most importantly, it kept the Iron Throne safe. Because as long as the great houses stayed isolated from one another, no single bloc could ever challenge the crown. But then that pattern shattered. Rickard Stark betrothed his eldest son Brandon to Catelyn Tully, linking the north to the Riverlands. He betrothed his daughter Lyanna to Robert Baratheon, linking the north to the Stormlands. And he sent his second son Ned to be fostered at the Eyrie with Jon Arryn, alongside Robert himself. That line Robert says about Ned being the brother he chose?
I never loved my brothers. You were the brother I chose.
That brotherhood was forged in the Vale, under Jon Arryn's roof, where the heirs of three great houses grew up side by side. Not by coincidence, by design. Now, the show never explains why all of this was happening, but the books do. In A Dance with Dragons, Lady Barbary Dustin reveals that Rickard Stark had what she calls Southron Ambitions, a deliberate strategy to build a coalition of great houses powerful enough to challenge the Iron Throne itself. And if you look at what the show actually shows us, Catelyn the Tully married to a Stark, Lysa the Tully married to Jon Arryn, Robert fostered with Ned in the Vale, Lyanna betrothed to Robert, 4 of the 7 kingdoms, the North, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, linked by blood and oath. And Tywin Lannister saw it happening, and he wanted in. And this is where the story takes a turn that changes everything.
If another house can seize one of our own and hold him captive with impunity, we are no longer a house to be feared.
Now this is where it gets fascinating, because Tywin didn't just observe this alliance from a distance. He actively tried to buy his way into it. In A Storm of Swords, Jaime recalls that his father entered into deep negotiations with Lord Hoster Tully to marry his golden heir, Jaime Lannister, to Hoster's second daughter, Lysa. Cersei herself whispered this to Jaime, that Tywin had gone so far as to invite Lord Hoster to King's Landing to discuss the dowry. The show never depicts this, but the implications are staggering. Because if Jaime marries Lysa, the Westerlands join the alliance. Now you don't have 4 kingdoms united against the crown. you have 5. The North, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, and the Westerlands. That's an insurmountable blockade surrounding the Crownlands from every direction. The Targaryens wouldn't have stood a chance, not even with dragons. And they didn't have dragons anymore. The deal was practically done. If it had gone through, there might never have been a bloody rebellion at all. The transition of power could have been surgical rather than catastrophic. But it didn't go through, because the Mad King had other plans. King Aerys II was many things. Paranoid, cruel, by most accounts genuinely insane. But he was not stupid. Not about this. He saw what was happening with these interregional marriages. He understood that the great houses were building a weapon aimed directly at his throne. And instead of addressing the root cause, instead of reforming or compromising or trying to earn their loyalty, he did what paranoid men always do. He struck back with spite. At the tourney at Harrenhal, Aerys made a move that changed the course of history. He named the 15-year-old Jaime Lannister to the Kingsguard. On the surface, it looked like an honor. A white cloak, a place among the finest knights of the realm. But everyone who mattered knew exactly what it really was. With one appointment, Aerys achieved 3 things simultaneously. He publicly humiliated Tywin by robbing him of his most capable heir in front of the entire realm. He permanently destroyed the Jaime-Lysa marriage pact, since Kingsguard knights are forbidden from marriage or inheritance. And he effectively took Jaime hostage, because from that moment forward, Tywin's golden son was trapped in the Red Keep, standing guard over the very king his father was plotting against. If you take a step back, it was, in its own twisted way, brilliant. One move that shattered Tywin's alliance, humiliated his legacy, and chained his son to the throne. And it's no surprise that Tywin immediately resigned as Hand of the King and retreated to Casterly Rock. But here's what Aerys didn't realize. By blocking Tywin from joining the alliance, he didn't prevent the rebellion. He guaranteed it. Because now the most powerful military and economic force in Westeros had a personal vendetta against the crown. And it was led by the most dangerous man alive. And this is where Tywin's genius truly reveals itself. Because when the rebellion finally erupts, after Brandon and Rickard Stark are burned alive, after Jon Arryn raises his banners, Tywin does something that drives both sides absolutely insane. He does nothing. For an entire year, while the bloodiest war in a generation rages across Westeros, Tywin Lannister sits in Casterly Rock, silent. The Crown sends ravens begging for his army. The rebels send ravens hoping for his support, and Tywin ignores them all. Most people interpret this as cowardice, or indecision. Even characters in the story call him a cautious opportunist. But when you understand the full picture, you realize his neutrality wasn't indecision at all. It was a trap. Tywin couldn't support Aerys, the king who had stolen his son, humiliated his legacy, and rejected his daughter Cersei as a bride for Prince Rhaegar. But he also couldn't openly join the rebels, not because he disagreed with them, but because Jaime was still inside the Red Keep. If Tywin declared for Robert, Aerys would have his son executed before the Raven reached Storm's End. So Tywin waited. He watched. And he let both sides bleed each other dry. Like a lion watching 2 wolves tear each other apart, knowing that when the dust settles, the lion feeds. But what if I told you that the moment Tywin finally moves, it reveals something even more calculated than his silence? Because what happens next isn't just a military maneuver. It's one of the most audacious deceptions in the history of Westeros. The Trident. Rhaegar is dead. Robert's warhammer has caved in the Dragon Prince's breastplate, scattering rubies into the river. The Royalist army is shattered, and the news reaches Casterly Rock. Now here's what most people miss. During the War of the Five Kings, decades later, the Westerlands field an army of over 50,000 men. But at the gates of King's Landing, Tywin arrives with only 12,000. The books confirm this exact number. That number is not an accident. That number is the key to everything. 12,000 men, almost certainly all cavalry, no infantry columns slowing them down, no supply wagons, no camp followers, no siege equipment. Just 12,000 of his hardest, fastest mounted soldiers, riding at a pace that should have been impossible. Because Tywin wasn't just racing to claim a victory, He was racing to save his son. Ned Stark's rebel vanguard was marching south to secure the capital. If Ned arrives first, the war ends on rebel terms. Aerys either surrenders or, knowing the Mad King, he does something catastrophic. He burns the city. He executes his hostages. Jaime dies. So Tywin rides. His men were fresh, unblooded, fully provisioned. While the rebel army had been fighting through a brutal winter for nearly a year, starving, exhausted, slogging through mud, the speed difference was devastating. And when he arrives at the gates, he plays his final card. He tells Aerys he's come to defend the city. Varys tells the king not to open the gates. Jaime himself, from inside the Red Keep, warns Aerys not to trust his own father. But Pycelle, who, as we learn later in both the books and in his confession scene in the show, had been secretly loyal to House Lannister for years, convinces Aerys to let them in. And just like that, it's over. The city falls. Aerys orders his pyromancer to burn it all. Jaime kills the pyromancer, then drives his sword into the Mad King's back. Tywin's hand-picked men storm the Red Keep, and by the time Ned Stark finally rides through the gates, he finds Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne, with Aerys' blood pooling on the floor. The Targaryen dynasty, 300 years old, is finished, and the man who ended it never swung a sword. But here's the part that truly makes this a masterpiece of political maneuvering. Because Tywin didn't just win the war, he won the peace. The man who sat on the sidelines for an entire rebellion, the man who never fought a single battle, the man who sacked a city that had opened its gates to him in good faith, that man ended up more powerful than any of the rebels who actually bled for the victory. Jon Arryn brokered the marriage between Robert Baratheon and Cersei Lannister, and with that single arrangement, Tywin achieved everything the Jaime-Lysa marriage was supposed to accomplish, and more. His daughter became queen. His grandchildren sat in line for the throne. Lannister gold funded the entire kingdom. And Tywin himself became the shadow behind every major decision in Westeros for the next 17 years. The alliance he was blocked from joining? He didn't need it anymore. He had something better. He had the crown itself. When you see all of this, that line from Jaime in the bath hits completely differently.
I knew my father better than that. It's never been one to pick the losing side.
It's not just a son's cynical observation about his father. It's the thesis statement for one of the greatest political operators in the history of fantasy fiction. Tywin didn't pick the winning side. He made sure that whichever side won, it would be his. And here's the deepest irony of all. The Mad King's one move to stop Tywin, stealing Jaime for the Kingsguard, didn't destroy his ambitions. It redirected them. It turned a man who might have been content as a powerful lord within a stable coalition into a man who would burn the old order to the ground and build a new one entirely around his family name. Aerys thought he was defusing a bomb. He was actually lighting the fuse. At the end of the day, Robert's Rebellion is remembered as a story about love, about Rhaegar and Lyanna, about a prince who stole a girl and a man who started a war to get her back. And yes, that's part of it. But beneath that romantic surface, there's a far colder, far more calculated story being told. A story about power, about patience, and about a man who understood something that almost no one else in Westeros ever did. The game isn't won by the man who swings the sword. It's won by the man who decides when to swing it. And Tywin Lannister chose his moment perfectly. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a comment and tell me. Do you think Tywin was the true winner of Robert's Rebellion? Or was he just lucky? Give this video a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell. Stay cult.